Welcome to Bike Walk Everytown, our advocacy training for Jackson County. Uh, Today we're going to be going over how to advocate for walking and biking in your community. We'll go into why this matters, why this is important, and we'll discuss different advocacy strategies that communities throughout Jackson County and beyond can choose to focus on, and then we'll go through uh, the structure of how to put a campaign action plan together. And we are recording this webinar, so this can be viewed anytime on YouTube. So today, I'm Maggie Mullen. I'm an advocacy manager at the Active Transportation Alliance, and my colleague Heather Shady, who's our senior transportation planner, will be speaking as well. And the Active Transportation Alliance, we're a nonprofit. We advocate for walking, biking, and public transit to create healthy, sustainable, equitable communities. And this webinar is part of the ISPAN program, which stands for Illinois State Physical Activity and Nutrition Program. It is designed to help people live healthier lives in Illinois. It was funded by the Center for Disease Controls and Prevention and led by the Illinois Public Health Institute, which is another nonprofit. The focus is on low income and rural areas, and there are 4 different buckets. There's breastfeeding, there's early childhood education, there's built environment, and food service guidelines. And Active Trans, we're working on the built environment part of this program, and we're the technical assistance provider. So the goal, we're trying to connect activity-friendly routes to everyday destinations by improving walking, biking, and transit systems to promote physical activity. And an example of something we've already done through the program, we were in Murfreesboro in August of this year, and we brought together a bunch of volunteers from the community, and we did a walk audit. So we walked the sidewalks of the city and assessed them, looked for cracks, looked for uneven tripping hazards, and volunteers wrote all this information down, and we're making an assessment of putting all this information together to look at what are the conditions of sidewalks in Murfreesboro and also where are they missing, so that we can help the city figure out how to repair those sidewalks and look for funding. And the mayor of Murfreesboro was there. You can see him in the lower right speaking to the group, and we had a really great turnout. So we were excited about that, but that was part of this grant, trying to improve walking and biking conditions. And today we're going to talk about an advocacy training program called Bike Walk Everytown, so you can bring these ideas, advocate for walking and biking in your own community, whether you're in Murfreesboro or any of the surrounding communities throughout Jackson County. We'll go through developing your advocacy skills, which are important. So advocacy is important for building community support for walking and biking, and we'll share resources that you can use to help you as you advocate. So what's involved today? We're gonna go into how do you make the case for walking and biking in your community, and that's probably one of the most important things, especially in small towns and rural communities, is just helping people understand why it's so important to have these healthy options for everyone in the community. And we'll go into creating an advocacy action plan, so we'll kind of step through what that looks like, 6 different steps, and you can take that and spend some time with it to create your own campaign plan. And then you'll be joining a network of other Jackson County community members who want better and safer walking and biking conditions. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to Heather, and she'll be speaking about making the case for walking and biking.
Great, thank you, Maggie. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I think my screen is frozen, so
Oh,
I can't
I can
control.
advance the slides.
Okay, thank you. And I'll have the PowerPoint just held up
Yeah.
on my side. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about why it's so important for all communities to think about promoting walking and biking as a form of travel, as opposed to um, solely a form of physical activity. So it's our belief at Active Transportation Alliance and that of a lot of other organizations we're working with, including Jackson County Health and the CDC, that all residents need safe access to the places that they need to get to, regardless of the size or the scale of their city or town. And it's important that they're able to walk, bike, catch a bus, or even drive a car to have safe streets and safe places to travel through their communities. Next slide. As I said, transportation really impacts everybody, and it impacts children, elderly, disabled people, and lower income people the most. These are usually the most vulnerable users of the road in our communities, and we need to think about how we design streets to make them really safe for these people especially, but the result will be that the streets are safe for everybody that's using them. Next slide, please. The Federal Highway Association released a report a couple years back called Small Towns and Rural Multimodal Networks that has a lot of great data and information in it, and we'll be talking through some of the points that they make in their report related to small communities and how transportation and lack of access to good walking and biking facilities really impacts people. Next slide, please. So starting with time, we know that people who live in rural communities are having to travel further and further to get to the destinations they need to reach every day. This means they have less time to spend with their families and friends and doing the things that they really want to do, and are spending more of that time in cars. And it's not just this sort of destination-based thinking, but this is having an impact on people in real ways. Rural Americans live an average of 17 minutes away from the nearest hospital, and that's compared to 12 minutes for suburbanites and 10 for urbanites. So it takes longer to get to medical care, and that can be a problem when there's an emergency. We've also seen an increasing trend, not just in rural areas, but everywhere, that schools are being sited much further away from the communities that they serve. And while it's good that schools are, finding more affordable land to site on, this means that kids are spending longer time on buses and in cars trying to reach school every day. And that impacts their ability to study and, again, spend time with family and friends, which isn't really what we want in our society. Next slide, please. So it's not just about time, it's also about health. As Maggie mentioned, our work on this project is being funded by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and has a very heavy health focus. Researchers have found that active transportation and using it every day in your life can really have positive impacts on your overall health and a community's health as well. Some studies have shown that teenagers who walk or bike to school watch less TV and smoke less than their peers who are driven to school, which is a pretty interesting correlation that was found. People who walk or bike more regularly have better mental health. Women who walk 30 minutes a day have a lower risk of breast cancer. And we know that while this is true that people's health can really be improved, it's again much more difficult in rural areas and small towns where there's just less availability and opportunity to walk or ride a bike places. Next slide. So just to bring it to Jackson County, we know that obesity is a growing concern across the country, and here in Jackson County, the most recent data from 2015 shows that over 31% of adults are obese. Which is a much higher number, I think, than anyone thinks it would be. Thinking about the children, the childhood obesity rate is growing year by year. And you can see this chart on the right shows that in the 60s, about 50 years ago, we had the percentage of kids who walked and biked to school was really high. It was close to 18%. And the percentage of kids who were obese or overweight was around 4%. Today, those two numbers have flipped. We now have a much higher rate of childhood obesity and a much lower rate of kids who walk and bike to school. And again, there has been a correlation found between these two data points showing that our growing inactivity and physical activity as a society is taking a toll on our health. The next slide is about safety. So we have done a lot of crash analyses here at our organization looking at the rates of crashes or the instances of crashes that are occurring in our state. And we looked a little more closely at the data in Jackson County and found that similar trends. So while vehicle occupants and drivers make up the majority of people involved in crashes and all crashes that happen here in our state, as you start to look at pedestrians and cyclists involved in crashes, they're much more likely to be seriously injured and then much more likely to be killed when involved in a crash. So while they don't make up a huge percentage of the overall number of crashes that happen in Jackson County, they're, again, people who are walking or riding bikes are much more likely to be killed if hit by a car. Next slide. And overall, crashes, whether people are involved in them or drivers or occupants in the cars, have a real toll on our state overall. The estimated economic cost of crashes per year in the state of Illinois is $8.1 billion. Every day, 3 people die on our streets, and 10 people are injured per hour, which is, again, horrifying numbers that none of us want to hear and hope we all, I think, hope to change. There's also financial reasons for thinking about walking and biking and making your community more walk and bike friendly. Again, here in the state, we have seen the gas tax pretty much stagnant over the past 20, 30 years, but the cost of transportation is going up and up and up. Communities are spending more and more money every year trying to maintain roads because they don't get the state funds that they used to, and that impacts other things within your community, their ability to make improvements or do different kinds of investments in the community. It's basically all focused on roads at this point. This is a problem for individuals too. The AAA every year analyzes how much it costs to own, operate, and maintain a car. And at this point, we're at $9,000 a year on average for households, which is, again, an astronomical amount of money. We'll talk a little bit about how that might impact different kinds of people. Next slide. So here we're going to go into the equity arguments for transportation. So if you think about people living in poverty paying $9,000 per year to own, operate, or maintain a car, that's pretty much unattainable. But people overall are spending more money on transportation, and it's affecting their ability to pay for other things. We know in rural households this is especially true. On average, urban households earn up to 30% more income than rural ones do. So people in rural areas and smaller towns have less spending power and less ability to have a car and maintain it and operate it in the way that they need to. When you look at poor minorities, the situation is even worse. 1/3 of poor minorities lack access to cars, versus the 12% of poor whites. Minority pedestrian fatalities are higher than those of whites. And then there's impacts on people with disabilities as well. Often people with disabilities are unable to leave their home because they don't have transportation systems that help serve them. They can't get to a bus stop, or they can't get out to reach a destination because there's no sidewalks or curb ramps and they're on a busy street. Not having access to walkable and bikeable and equitable transportation systems also impacts older adults. More and more people are aging, our population is aging, and as people get older, we really need to start thinking about how we're going to be able to serve them better through our transportation system. And the current system of everybody has a car and can drive it to wherever they're going won't work in the future. Next slide. Finally, it's not all about the numbers. Having healthy, safe, equitable transportation systems create happy communities. when I'm out and about walking in my neighborhood, I'm happier than I am when I'm in a car. There's an opportunity to connect with your neighbors, your friends, your family, get out and enjoy the weather when it's nice out, see the birds. So creating transportation systems that serve people make people happy. Next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit about how walking and biking can help in the next few slides, and there's a lot of things we'll cover. So first of all, building walk and bike friendly communities is great for the local economy. Residents who walk or bike more regularly actually end up spending more money in their local business districts than those who drive, because they're usually making more trips more frequently and have time to stop a little more often. And this is also true for, I would say, small town corridors, commercial corridors, residents can have more opportunities to shop and dine and enjoy their local community. Another study found that bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure projects can create more jobs per dollar than any other type of infrastructure spending. So if you're able to build trails or sidewalks or bike lanes, those types of projects will actually produce more jobs for your local economy than those of highway construction or other things. Next slide. It's also good for your local economy. Again, we talked a little bit about health, and the American Heart Association found that for every dollar spent on building a walking path or a biking trail, saves $3 in medical costs on average. Trails bring in lots of tourism. I know down in the Jackson County area, that's a big deal because you do have beautiful trails and natural forest preserves. So trails can help bring more tourism dollars, and providing connections to those trails can do the same. Next slide. So again, we often hear of creating walkable and bikeable communities as an urban issue, but it's not. It's also a rural issue and something that can be done in rural areas. Nearly 40% of trips are shorter than 3 miles, which is usually an easily bikeable distance, and 20% are shorter than 1 mile, which is a good walking distance. The USDOT did a study recently asking rural Americans what their highest priority was for transportation, and people overwhelmingly said sidewalks, and that included a long list of things like major roads being reconstructed, traveling long distances, and so on. Next slide. So I'll end with just some resources that I mentioned or didn't mention in my talk. The first is the small town and rural multimodal networks. Again, I mentioned this in one of my earlier slides, but it lays out a lot of good facts and data about why active transportation facilities matter to rural communities, and also provides some resources on how to design streets to make them safer. Similarly, Complete Streets, Complete Networks, Rural Context is a guide that our organization put together several years ago. There you can find recommendations for how wide to build a bike lane, and how to kind of think through the design process. And then finally, there's a guidebook called Bike Walk Eat, a planning playbook for rural communities, developed by the Jackson County Health Department. And in there you'll find, again, some more tools on how to design more walking, biking, and healthy food-related communities. And I think now I'm turning it back over to Maggie, who will talk more about and get more in depth about our advocacy training for tonight.
All right, thank you, Heather. So now that all of you have an idea of how to make the case and all the different benefits and reasons why walking and biking and creating those options for people are important, now the next step is thinking about how you can help your community. And so, here you are, and you say maybe you have a project idea in mind, whether it's a crosswalk or a sidewalk improvement or a bike lane. And one thing that we've, through our advocacy work, have found that's really important is that one, communities have the right policies in place, and number two, that there's community support behind improving walking and biking. And so the policies and the advocacy priorities that are important, there are five general buckets that we believe can, when a community starts focusing on these five things, they can make a big difference in actually creating those projects that you're thinking of, whether it's that crosswalk or that trail. So one is having a complete streets policy, and this means that the road is designed to support users of all modes. So not only driving, but people walking or biking or accessing transit. And so when a road is rebuilt or reconstructed, that's the time to consider could walking and biking be an option for that road? So that complete streets policy brings this into the planning process. So roads are not just immediately thought of as being for cars only. So Carbondale actually has a complete streets resolution, and the beginning line says Carbondale, Illinois views all transportation improvements as opportunities to connect neighborhoods, calm traffic, and improve safety. And the National Complete Streets Coalition, they house a database of all the complete streets policies and resolutions throughout the country. And from what we know, Carbondale is the only community in Jackson County that has a complete streets policy. So this is something that other communities, no matter how big or small, could also advocate for. And when are complete streets possible? So again, it's when there's new construction, when a road is being repaved or resurfaced, some new construction is going on, if there's utility work, if there's a new subdivision going in or a site redevelopment. Those are all, they provide low cost options for adding improvements for people walking and biking and accessing transit, because the road is already being improved, money is already going into this. So often it's just a matter of adding some different paint on the ground. So in rural communities and small towns, I just want to highlight who owns the roads, because that's something to consider and think about as you advocate, as you focus in on certain streets in your community. So often in rural communities, most of your streets are owned by your local government, your local municipality, but often there is a main street running through your community, kind of in the hub activity center of your city or village, and that street is often owned by the state, so the Illinois Department of Transportation. So, but streets can also be owned not only by the state or the local municipality, but also by the county or by a township. And so whoever owns the road, that agency is responsible for funding those streets, for construction, for maintenance, for all operations. And when improvements are made to that particular street, the agency who owns the road, they get to decide if the new designs are okay or not. So improvements have to meet their design standards. So in addition to having a complete streets policy, having an active transportation plan is really important for moving forward walking and biking improvements. So an active transportation plan could also be a bicycle plan, a pedestrian plan, and what this is, it maps out a vision of a connected transportation network so that infrastructure improvements can be prioritized. So it's mapping out where your crosswalks going, where do sidewalks need to be improved, where could there be a bike lane, where if there's a trail gap, how could that trail gap be connected? And then it brings in a lot of community input to determine what do community members want. And this image right here, if you're watching the YouTube recording or watching the presentation live on your computer, this image is showing a map of Carbondale because Carbondale has a bike plan that they did a few years ago, and it highlights what came out of that process and what community members want in Carbondale. So now funding. So after you have a policy and plan in place, that's a good place to start. But once you have this vision for what you want and a commitment to saying we want walking and biking improvements, funding is important. So these projects do require some funding. So often, we hear funding can be a barrier, especially in smaller communities. But the good news is that there is a lot of state and federal funding out there that they're often looking for smaller communities, rural communities to fund projects in. So just some examples of some federal funding that has recently come into Jackson County. So there's a program called ITEP, which is Illinois Transportation Enhancement Program. So that is, it's previously always been federal dollars that it's an amazing source for walking and biking infrastructure projects. It's usually one of the main go-to funding sources that your community can apply for. And it has recently, in the last 10 years, helped fund a couple pedestrian and bicycle paths in Carbondale. And good news is that this June, our organization was doing a lot of advocacy around this, but the capital bill for Illinois now includes annually $50 million of state funds to be dedicated to walking and biking projects. And this funding will be available starting in the summer or fall of 2020. And it will be through that ITEP program. 25% of the funds will be dedicated to higher need communities. The local match so often when federal funding is involved, a community gets 80% of the funding covered for a road project, but 20% of the funding has to come from the community. But now this $50 million will be a sliding scale based on what a community is what funds are available in a given community. So we're really excited about this $50 million, and we're hoping to see a lot more walking and biking projects throughout the state, but that's a really great resource that all of the communities throughout Jackson County can tap into. And Safe Routes to School is another great funding source. So this past year, 2019, Murfreesboro Middle School won some funding for improvements to sidewalks, to curb ramps, to crossings around their school. In addition to federal and state dollars, something you can consider is talking to your local officials on how to access local funding. And they may have a lot of ideas that you weren't aware of, but often we've seen institutions, businesses, companies, schools, universities, foundations help fund different walking and biking projects. So it's something to talk to your local officials about. So implementation is another important advocacy priority. So, once you have a policy in place, you have that active transportation plan in place, now how do you implement that vision? So advocacy is often needed to push those plans and policies forward so they don't just become pieces of paper that are collecting dust in your municipality's offices. So finally, having an advisory council is something that can be helpful for actually making sure walking and biking projects end up on the ground in your community. So having a bicycle pedestrian task force. So this involves community members and often a liaison from your local government. And if that's not possible, you can still have a council that can um, help act as an advisor for holding the municipality accountable for walking and biking projects and policies. So now we're going to get into the action plan. So building a campaign in your community. So here's several examples of different infrastructure projects that we've seen in smaller communities, rural communities, and these projects don't just appear out of nowhere. It does take some leadership, and it requires a vision. It requires a plan. So that's where you come in. So if you're listening to this, now's the time to grab a pen and a piece of paper because we're going to go through some steps, and you can kind of jot down your ideas, your brainstorm, your thoughts as we go through all the steps. And because this is being recorded, you can always go back, pause, and re-listen to these different steps. So the steps there, we've got 6 steps that we're going to walk you through, and there's actually a for something that you can access later. There is a campaign action planning worksheet available online. So it is available on our website. It's activetrans.org/bikewalkeverytown. But I'm going to go through each of these steps and kind of explain what is the step and provide an example so you can see what it could look like. And then as I'm going through these steps, as you're listening, kind of think about your own community and how it could apply there and what you want to see. So step 1 is choosing a goal. So this is choosing a big picture goal. So those are those 5 advocacy goals that we went through previously. So whether it's a complete streets policy, having an active transportation plan, a bike plan, a pedestrian plan, having an advisory council, implementing a project, or advocating for better funding for these plans and policies. It's a good idea to just have a goal in mind of something that you're seeking to achieve. And this is a long-term goal. It will create long-term change. And again, we recommend that if you don't have a complete streets policy or some type of walking and biking plan, that's a good place to start. So after you kind of come up with you select your big picture advocacy goal, choosing a priority project is helpful. So that priority project could be a specific infrastructure project, such as a new crosswalk or a bike lane. And the idea is this is something tangible that those in your community can eventually help you push forward, and that by doing so, that helps push forward this larger big picture advocacy goal that you have. So we've got Everytown, Illinois as an example for each of these steps. So their policy goal is they want their community to have an active transportation plan. So they want to map out where should the walking and biking infrastructure go, what makes sense in their communities. And often if you're in a smaller community or rural setting, often you're the center of town where some of your commercial businesses may be. That's a good place to make sure you do have a lot of safe walking and biking infrastructure, and then thinking about your community as that's your activity hub, and then there's maybe some spokes going out from that hub that are reaching some further out areas, but really focusing in on your hub if you're in a rural or smaller community is a good place to start. But anyway, so Everytown, Illinois, their policy goal is to have an active transportation plan, and their priority project, they want to see a crosswalk on their main street. So next step is, who is your target? So this is essentially your decision maker. So the person or people who can give you what you want, who can help you reach that advocacy goal that you have, who can help you get that priority project that you selected on the ground. And some ideas for you. It could be your mayor, it could be a village manager, it could be a trustee, a council member, an alderman. So every community is different, and it's your goal right now is to narrow down who could your target be. So again, who is the person or people who can give you what you want, and Everytown, Illinois, so their example, so their target is going to be their village council member, John Ivy, and their mayor, Mary Green. And what's important here is once you narrow down who is your target, who has the power to make decisions and to move your projects forward, making sure you name a name. So your target has a name, and thinking about who are they, who do they care about, and what are their values. And what's nice actually in smaller communities is often you might have a direct connection to your mayor or a village council member. But whether you do or don't, this is a tool you can use. It's a power mapping tool. So this is a little flower. We have on the presentation in the middle of the flower is your decision maker, so the target you chose, so maybe just your mayor, and then surrounding your target, that the mayor is, who do they know, who is their inner circle, so who are their staff, who's their family, their friends, what businesses are they associated with, who are their donors, and just thinking about all of the potential influencers that affect your target. So it's something that you can think about in your community. So not only if you did need to get in touch with this target, they could help you if you can kind of brainstorm who is their inner circles. Someone from that circle might be able to help you get in touch with your target. But if you already have a good connection, they might be able to speak to your target in a way that and speak to them about walking and biking and why it's important for your community in a way that can really move them and get them, on your side. So step 3 is who is your base. So this is all about building community support and thinking about who will directly benefit from your goal and from the priority project that you selected. So thinking about who are influential residents in your community. Are there any organizations or businesses that also you could reach out to? And also thinking about vulnerable road users, as Heather was mentioning. These are people that could benefit the most from improved walking and biking options in your community, and how can you reach them and get their input and share your campaign with them. So thinking about what organizations they might be a part of, and then also really starting with yourself. So who do you know? Who are your friends? Who are your neighbors? Who are your colleagues? You could ask for their advice on, who might be interested in getting that crosswalk on Main Street. And what do you know any businesses or organizations? So it's really kind of just talking to people and asking them who do they know, who's in their network. And again, because if you are in a smaller community, you probably know a lot of people in your community. So this step might be a lot easier for you than someone who's in a larger city like Carbondale. Um, but um, but it's still, no matter what size of a community you live in, it's still worth thinking about, who is this impacting, and how can we work together to move our target, to move the decision maker. Uh, Another thing to think about after you've kind of compiled your list of who is your base, where can you get started, now thinking about how can you engage them. Uh, some things that you could do, you could schedule a regular meeting in a comfortable location. You could create an event, create a walk around the community to visit local businesses. You could organize a bike ride. You could create some resources like flyers, fact sheets, if you really, need to make the case for why walking and biking and transit access is important for people in your community. You could start a petition around your priority project, and we've seen petitions being a really great way for getting the attention of elected officials and showing them that a lot of people in the community support a specific idea. You could create a presentation. You could go to visit some of those businesses and organizations and speak to a large audience about your vision. And there's probably many other ideas, so you can get creative as you're thinking about this for your own community. But as an example from Everytown, Illinois, so they're going to reach out to this advocate's going to reach out to residents first, so people that they know, their neighbors, their friends. They're going to try to reach out to parents at their child's school. They like to attend some festivals. They're going to reach out to people there, some trail users, organizations. They're going to they're going to look for some parent groups, for hiking and biking clubs, for some senior groups, for Chamber of Commerce, the local health hospital. So the Jackson County Health Department has been a wonderful partner with us on the iSpan project. They are the reason we got so many people volunteering on that Murfreesboro walk audit that we did last month. And finally, businesses. So thinking about, are there some shops in your community that you could reach out to? Maybe there's a library or some other civic institution. And then Everytown, Illinois, this advocate, their plan is they're going to hold monthly meetings at a local coffee shop, and they're going to start a petition about building a crosswalk on Main Street. So next is step 4. So this step is assessing your capacity. So thinking about how much time do you have to dedicate towards this campaign that you're creating. What are your strengths? What experiences do you bring to the table? Are there any skills that you would like to develop, like writing or public speaking, or maybe making a video? And then ask yourself what else you might need to make your campaign a success. So think about additional capacity you may need to build. And here's an example from Everytown, Illinois. So they're available to work on this 5 hours per month, and they have a lot of passion. They have connections to their elected officials, to the village board. They really like social media, and they are a Spanish speaker. There are skills that they'd like to develop. They'd like to become a better writer. They'd like to expand their network at local shops. And they need help with marketing, with spreading the word to more people. And one thing about deciding your availability, so this is an important step, and it is important to be honest about what you have to give, and even if it's modest, that's okay, and you're more likely to be successful if you don't burn yourself out. All right, so step 5. this is the step of planning your tactics. So this is thinking about how are you going to get your target, your decision maker to move? So how are you going to get your mayor to be on board with that project that you want to see in your community? So planning your tactics, this involves communication. So how are you spreading the word with the general public, with your base to build up community support? So we recommend starting with two communication tactics as a starting place, again, so you don't overwhelm yourself. So it could be your local newspaper. You could write a letter to the editor. You could get an article published. It could be just getting involved on social media and drawing some attention to your idea. You could start a Facebook group if you're on Facebook, for example. Email. We always recommend collecting email information, or at least contact information, for the people you meet as you're building your base. And it's just a good way to easily get in touch with people, or maybe it's phone numbers, but you could send out a regular e-newsletter to update people about your project. And there are, of course, many other ideas, but just thinking through how can you communicate with people in your community. And then number 2 is engagement. So how do you directly engage your target that you chose in step number 2? And this is coming up with persuasive information or putting public pressure on your target. So it could be writing a petition. You could write, email, call your elected official. You could actually schedule a meeting with them to discuss your idea and bring others who are supportive. Or you could testify at a public meeting. And some of you may have additional ideas. So an example from Everytown, Illinois, they are going to collect emails and names and invite residents to a Facebook page that they started, and they're going to write a short article about their initiative for the crosswalk for their local newspaper. And then to engage their target, which was the mayor and a city council member, they're going to write a petition about their crosswalk to show that there's community support, and then they're going to schedule a meeting with their mayor and present that petition to the mayor, to the council member that they chose, and then also talk about that bigger goal for having a active transportation plan for their community. So finally, step 6, this is the last and final step. So this is bringing it all together. It's creating benchmarks for your plan. So we recommend making a timeline and planning benchmarks so that you can help celebrate your achievements, or maybe it's to recalibrate your strategy along the way if things aren't working as you had expected. So we recommend breaking benchmarks into 3 different time periods. So one is a short-term tasks, actions you can take. So what can you do in the next 2 months? You also looking at what can you do in the next 3 months to 8 months. So that's more of a medium-term time frame. And then finally, what is more long-term? So 8 months to over a year. So those are kind of bigger projects that are going to require more support and people. So one recommendation is making sure, as you're putting together your benchmarks, making sure they are SMART. So this stands for specific, measurable, ambitious, realistic, and time limited. So for example, you could say, I'm going to collect the email addresses of 100 supporters within 1 month. So having some specific goals can help you measure how you're doing. And so an example from Everytown, so how they're bringing all of their ideas together. They're going to get that petition written in the first 2 months for the crosswalk, and they're going to get 50 people signing that petition. That's their goal, and there's a specific measurable goal as a part of that benchmark. And then they're going to start a Facebook page within the first 2 months. And then medium term, so within 8 months, they're going to schedule a meeting with their mayor to discuss what they're looking for, and then they're going to write an article for their local newspaper. And then more long term, they decided that they're going to organize a walk audit. So that's what we did in Murfreesboro. So they're going to walk through their sidewalks. They're going to walk their sidewalks to assess all of them, and kind of bring attention to their priority project for the crosswalk. And they're going to collect feedback from those who are involved to understand what do they want in their community, what kind of walking and biking infrastructure, so that it can inform the future active transportation plan. So another way to organize all of this, you can put this into a table, which we have all of this online, but it's basically you can fill out your tactics. So how are you engaging your base? How are you communicating with your base? And how are you engaging your target? You fill out the action or task that is associated with each of those tactics. Put down a timeline. Here in this example, it's saying short, medium, long, but it's really great if you can actually say on December 9th, I'm going to have done X, Y, and Z. So having a timeline, and then your measure of success. So that's having a specific number associated with what you're doing. So you're going to host some meetings, and your goal is to have 10 people attend the meetings. And then in this table, writing down what kind of skills or support do you need. Maybe you need help finding a location, or maybe you need some assistance with writing or editing. And then assigning who is going to be the lead on a task and any support people that can help you. So that's important. It creates some accountability, and if it's ideally, you can encourage some others to get involved in your campaign, and so this isn't all falling on you. So yeah, finding some teammates to help you out. So that is the structure of putting together an advocacy campaign. And again, you can go back through this recording and kind of think through each of these steps and do a really good brainstorm for your community. And I wanted to leave you with this picture, which I really love, which it's a tulip, a yellow tulip among many red tulips, and it's showing tiny events like that yellow tulip can disrupt a pattern. So you can be that yellow tulip, and you can, by bringing attention to these issues in your community, expressing how you see it's important for your quality of life and all of those who live in your community, how walking and biking can benefit everyone. Yeah, you can make a difference. So I wanted to also leave you with an advocacy tip of creating an elevator pitch. So if you're, planning on talking to people in your community, your elected officials, your target, about your goal or your priority project that you'd like to see in your community, there's a few tips on how to put together a pitch, and this is just something that we recommend you spend some time putting together, so that you can quickly get your thoughts across and keep people's attention. And it's called an elevator pitch because you usually don't have much time in an elevator. And can you explain what your campaign is on that elevator ride? So maybe 30 seconds and at most 60 seconds. So we recommend you start with introducing yourself. You explain your campaign, start with the problem, what is the issue, and then what is your solution, and then request any action that they can take. And there is one rule that you could apply, it's called the 27-9-3 rule, and for each of those different sections, So when you're talking about the problem, the goal is try to write something that's 27 words long or no more than 27 words. And if you were to say it, that it takes no more than 9 seconds, and that it includes no more than 3 points. So that's a way to structure each of those sections. So here's an example from a Safe Routes to School, or it was an America Walks report. So they actually start with a hook. So it is a good way to grab people's attention. It says, the other day, my son John was walking home from school and a car almost hit him. He and his friend face this danger every day trying to get home from school. So that's your hook. It brings some attention to your issue. So the problem is there are no sidewalks and cars move very fast, making it unsafe for our children. So this advocate is explaining that problem, like we need sidewalks, and it's a problem because cars are moving really fast and it is unsafe. And then the solution, so what are you recommending? And it says we need to get sidewalks installed and reduce the speed limit to 15 miles per hour in the area. So those are the two solutions this person has come up with. And then your call to action, which is really essential, always make sure you have a call to action, is will you sign our petition and attend the city council hearing in support of legislation that lowers the speed limit and funds sidewalk installation. So there's an example for you of an elevator pitch. And one resource that I wanted to make sure you're aware of, there's a statewide advocacy group called Ride Illinois. They are a great resource, and they were actually involved in Carbondale's bike plan a few years ago. So they provide design input on road projects. They will partner with you if you want to request a 3-foot law sign. So on the right, if you're looking at the presentation, there's an example of one of those signs. So it's state law now that, and it has been for a while, that cars must give bicyclists a 3-foot distance separation while passing. And then they also have a bike safety quiz, which is a fantastic quiz that teaches bike safety law for Illinois, and they have different quizzes for different people. So for children, for adults, for driver's ed students, and you can take the quiz at bikesafetyquiz.com. I highly recommend it, and they also do offer some stipends for schools who get their students taking the quiz. So a few other resources. So Bike Walk Every Town, that campaign planning worksheet that you can use to put a campaign together, as well as a lot of other resources with just guidance and information on how to put all of those different tactics and communication ideas together. So it's activetrans.org/bikewalkeverytown. Heather had mentioned the Complete Streets Rule Context Guide, the Federal Highway Administration Small Town and Rural Multimodal Networks Guide. Those are also excellent resources, so the links are there on the presentation, and that Jackson County Role Planning book. And there's also some great Safe Routes to School rule resources and a Safe Routes to Parks guide. So you can Google all these things also. There's amazing resources out there. So thank you all for joining us today. So there's Heather's email, heather@activetrans.org, and mine is maggie@activetrans.org. So you're always welcome to get in touch with us, and we're happy to provide assistance as we're able to. So, and also a big thank you to Jackson County Health Department for partnering with us in all of these projects, and we're looking forward to hearing from you and seeing what pops up in Jackson County. Right, thank you. And also, I should add, if anyone on the live webinar has any questions, we're happy to ask question or answer questions, and there's also a little comment box if you're online watching. But otherwise, contact us. All right. Well, thanks everyone.